Hi, everybody. I'm Wendy Murdoch, and this is Webinars with Wendy. I am still doing my webinars, and we are approaching 360. I think this is 364. We are almost at one a day for an entire year since I started. Started in 2020, in March 2020 during COVID. Obviously, back then I was doing like 4 to 5 a week in the beginning of COVID, and now I've taken that back. And we will be taking a break over the holidays, so. But then we'll be back, and we have some more really interesting guests coming along. Today my guest is Melissa Chapman, and she's here to talk about her book. And she has a dog, and so it's totally fine. We know you're a good person if you have a dog. You know, it's part of the deal.
I'm trying to ignore him.
Yeah. It's okay.
It usually works.
So welcome, Melissa. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me to come on and talk about my book and the newly released audiobook version, which has some new stories in it. And I think what we had lightly touched upon was connections and the deep connection that is possible with horses. And it's hard to explain sometimes when people ask.
So Melissa, before we dive into your book, let's get a little back. Like, have you always loved horses? How, where did you start connecting with?
Yes,
you have horses as a kid?
Probably like most people on your show. Yes, to those questions. Did not come from a horsey family or a horsey background, but one of those mysterious children that are born with it, like first words, first stories in school, anything I asked for Christmas as far back as myself or my family can remember. So it goes way back, and I had to work hard for it because I did not come from a wealthy family or, as I said, a horsey family. But I got my,
Where'd you grow up?
Pardon?
Where'd you grow up?
I was born, and my first part of growing up is in Pennsylvania, Northeast Pennsylvania. That's where most of my family is from and where all my relatives and cousins mostly still are. And then we moved here to Binghamton in upstate New York. And that's where I did most of my growing up from 10 or 11 on. And so, I took riding lessons as I could, but just was absolutely obsessed. Never outgrew that. You know how they tell people, girls.
You'll outgrow. Oh, yeah.
They'll outgrow it. Yes. My parents probably wished that were true, but it was not. So I did get my first horse in my teens, and the idea, which is the story of Distant Skies, which was a very long distance horseback ride. I can't even tell you exactly where that came from, except that what I was drawn to with horses was their natural part of the world outside. Like most people who didn't have a horse for a while, your only access is taking lessons or working for, in exchange for riding, cleaning stalls. But it was always like in a ring, that type of thing. And I even, showed local shows for a little while because that was the thing to do. But what I loved was trail riding and being outside. And I just remember even being a little kid and we'd be driving, I'd be in the back seat of a car and thinking, look at that trail. I want to ride a horse there. Where does that dirt road go? And it just grew. It just called to me. So that's how I don't have an exact moment, but that's how that started.
So you started riding as a kid, like at a local stable, or?
Yeah. I begged for lessons and did in our area at that time, there were only English lessons available, which was fine. Any horses are fine. And that grew eventually though to trail and distance, which was more practical in a Western saddle because you could tie things to it and hang things, and it just grew from there. But yeah, it started with just the most basic beginner lessons with the local person that everyone went to. But then when I was about 14, there was a riding stable up here, and some people from New York City had bought the stable, and they weren't horse experienced. And so they allowed us horse crazy teenagers, boys and girls, to work in exchange for riding. And that was, I always say I have a lack of early professional training, where people would start talking about a horse dropping their shoulder or picking up the correct lead. And I was always kind of like, I was learning it from books and it's not the same. But that kind of training was seat of your pants riding, where they'd say, grab a horse and go bring the other horses from the pasture, and you do develop a good seat and so on from doing that kind of thing too. So
where was that? What was
that
the name
was
of
in
it?
this area
Okay.
outside town. Yep. Outside Binghamton, New York. Yep.
Cool. So that was like during your teenage years or high school years?
Yep.
Yeah.
Very determined. It was about 10 miles from my house. I remember riding my bike up there before I was old enough to drive, just to muck stalls and do all that stuff in exchange for an hour or two of riding. So,
I think it's so important for people to hear about those stories for a couple of reasons, because so often people think, well, I have to own a horse, or my parents have to, and it's not true. There's a lot of opportunities for kids that, I didn't come from a horsey family, and the same thing is you just figure it out. I think there's really something to that. You have the initiative and you really follow through on it.
You're right. And there's always those couple people that see that in you and help
out. Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
From that, and I don't know if you do the same, but from that, because I ride out in the world, I ride on my road, I ride to where I go. I've been doing that my whole life. When people stop, nowadays they stop and take pictures when they see a horse, but so many times over the years, it'd be kids or someone would call me that knew my parents or whatever and said, I have this horse crazy kid. Can they come up and visit? And I always said yes. Always put a kid on a horse, even if it was just to lead them or let them sit there for a minute, because I remember the first time someone did that for me, and it feeds it, it doesn't.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So you might not know this about me, but I bought my first horse at 15, kept it at my dad's house, and delivered newspapers to pay for his board, to pay for his feet and stuff. So I get the riding. I used to wear his shoes off. I used to ride down I had to go alongside a pretty busy road to get to trails. But so we have that kind of in common, that early years of, like, my parents didn't have a clue what I was up to.
Same thing. I would just tell them. In fact, how they have Throwback Thursday on social media? I found this old picture. I was in about 7th grade, sitting on a nice looking horse. And I remember that those were people that were letting me ride for work. And he was a young stud horse. And my parents didn't know, and I was like, he actually was a good, well-behaved young fellow. But I remember looking at that now and going, I would have never let my dad do that, But they just took my word for things,
Yeah. And you didn't tell them if something bad happened. You just didn't tell them.
No. So it's sometimes a disadvantage to not come from a horsey family. Sometimes it's a good thing too. So yeah. Great.
So then did you go to college, or where did you go from there?
I went only for a year to Cobleskill, which is a SUNY, which is State University of New York school, who has, I don't know if some people might have heard of Morrisville and Delhi. They have a horsemanship program under the Ag Division, Animal Husbandry. But I only did that for a year. I was very much a free spirit, and very much by that age, this horse trip had, I don't want to say taken over my mind, because that doesn't sound good, but it was my thing. You know what I mean? I was working towards it and dreaming about it and looking up maps and stuff by then. And I do have to say, it was before the internet. So yes, you had to look up books and maps and write letters to people and so on. But
all right. So tell us about this. When did you start to know that you wanted to do a horse trip?
Well, I talked about it a little bit, and it's funny, in writing the book, I had done some writing before that, but it's funny, the little things that trip you up. And the prologue was just a page or two long. I really wanted to convey, when something is calling to you, it's a drive, similar to you peddling papers so you could ride and so on. And it became that to me. And as I was riding, I realized I felt the most, again, the word connection, but it's one of my favorites and covers so much, to the horse, to the world, to the people that would stop and talk, was out riding, not in a ring, not, trying to win a ribbon, but just sort of being out there in the world. And so it seemed to combine everything that I cared about. I was outdoors, which I'm still very outdoorsy. I was riding. I was following my own dream. And I would start to ride and do a 5-mile ride or a 10-mile ride. And I was like, but why can't you? Right. Just keep going, why can't you? And it was the early 80s. I should say that. So there was no cell phones, no Google Maps, none of that stuff. but one of the books, my dad had given me a book called The Travels of Jamie McFeeters. And it's about the Westward movement, the mid 1800s, not necessarily the Oregon Trail, but the Westward movement with wagon trains. And oh my gosh, I was just so enchanted with that type of thing. When I was a little girl, my father was taking my brother to see True Grit in the movies, and I started crying because I'd seen the commercial for it and I knew there was horses. And so some of us are just born like sort of called to that lifestyle and everything. And so it was modern world, but I just remember riding and just thinking, but why can't you? Like before there was the highways, before there was freeways and interstates, there was back roads and trails, and they're still there. They're still there now. And it kind of grew from there. So I didn't. So
you had this dream of riding to where? Where did you want to go?
So I just wanted to go as far as I could, which when you're in the Northeast, like I am, for me, it was California. Originally it was just West, I didn't have it was never about, I didn't break any world record. I didn't beat anyone else's long distance ride. It was a very personal, I wasn't trying to be famous or anything like that, but it was, I always say, I think it's a uniquely American pull to go West. And people in the West probably hate when we overpopulate their beautiful states, but that's the best way I can explain it. There's something in us, in our collective psyche, if you will, that go West, and it was the fantasy, the romance of the wide open spaces and the things that I loved here, which was being in the woods and the hills and the fields. There's just more of that there. And so that's what pulled me in that direction. So looking at a map and looking at timing, you have the whole West Coast. You could go a more northern route, but knowing that I would cover several seasons, I chose that more southern route and headed for southern.
So then your book Distant Skies, then is that chronicling your journey that you rode?
Exactly. Yep. So it starts, it actually starts prior to me leaving, but explaining where this dream came from, much like we're discussing now. And the discovery of, and all horse people will say, yep, I know, that once in a lifetime horse. And I've had some amazing, wonderful horses in my life. But there's that one, if you asked any horse person, name one, I found that guy. And luckily he was cut out for the same thing. He was not happy in a ring. He was happy out wandering. He never tried to turn home too soon or anything. And so we planned it. And there were several, like any big dreams, there's always things that happen and things that go wrong. And I had several dates.
Okay, but wait, we have to talk about this horse. Tell us the name of this horse.
So his name was Rain Dance. I got him when he was 4 years old, about turning 5, no papers, but very much a quarter horse. He was, they all have a story about the papers being lost, but he was buckskin, and he looked very quarter horse. And I had one of those, sorry to my husband, people talk about, do you believe in love at first sight? In my life, it happened once, and it was this horse.
So where did you find him?
Just through an ad in the paper, the good old classified ads. And he was standing in a field with several other horses for sale, but, it was, I think the horse guardian angels were watching out for me that day, and he was the one. So
how old were you when you got Rain Dance?
I was 19.
Okay, so you were technically an adult at that point.
Yeah.
So nobody could tell you not to get him.
Yes, and I'd saved, it was my own money and my own work, and at this point, he was not my first horse. I had a horse who was a lovely, good first horse, but he was much older. He was probably 20 when this was going on. I had him a few years before. This horse who I called Rain Dance, but we end up calling Rainey. And we just took to each other. In the beginning of the book, I explained, this is not how you do it. You don't get a 4-year-old. You don't, say this horse and I are going to do all this stuff. And I had no trainer. I had no backup, but you know what? The bottom line is you just ride. And I'm a big reader. I'm still a big reader. And I read every horse book and every horse magazine, again, pre-internet. So there's no YouTube, there's no online clinics or webinars, but I was a huge reader, and I just you can do that all you want, but what it really takes to make that bond and to see if you are both capable of what you're dreaming of is to just ride, and that's what we did. And around here in the Northeast, in fact, I was riding on the road about a year ago. My neighbor passed me, and she no longer lives near here, but she had, it was a couple years, I guess. She has horses, and she goes, "You're still riding? I put mine up for the winter." And I'm like, if it's not icy and it's not dangerous, I still go, even if I can only last 20 minutes and it's really cold. So that's what I did with him that first year, and then the second year. So between him and I finding each other and the actual growing of this dream, like all of a sudden I had the right horse. I had a horse that could do this. And you can imagine being 19, like you said, technically you're adult, but come on, how worldly are you at 19, right? So I think what I said in my book was, it's a funny age because you want to be different, but you also want to fit in. You want to establish yourself. And my way, I think now as an adult, looking back on it, I don't think I recognized it then, but I think that was my way of becoming an adult. It was, some people, it's college, career, they get married. For me, it was like, I have this calling to me. I'm going to follow this call, so to speak. So I had Rainey about 3 or 4 years, and we started a true conditioning program. My veterinarian at the time his wife was getting into endurance riding, which was becoming popular in the early 80s. And so I was able to learn about like electrolytes and pulse and respiration. I took the horse training part very seriously. We started building up. The horse got muscled up nice. And as a horse person, one of the things that meant the most to me, that even miles, hundreds, thousands of miles from home, people would see him and go, "Your horse looks good." Like, he was working hard every day, but he had a nice weight. He had a shiny coat. He had good feet and legs. So as a horse person, that's like the best compliment that you can get. But he was cut out for this type of thing, So I had him about 3 or 4 years when finally, I had planned a date and didn't go. I had people that said, "I would go with you." At the time, I was kind of like, okay, because to be honest, as much as it called to me, it also was scary. You know what I mean? Like, I was like,
oh yeah, sure. Going out by yourself, riding across country with just you and your horse and no internet, no cell phone. Yeah.
Yes. And I should add, there was someone else with us. That's my dog. Gypsy is also featured quite largely in the book, Distance Guys. So it's kind of all this planning I said I did with the horse and conditioning and training and learning about this stuff. I spent 3 or 4 years from buying Rainey to picking a date that we really were going to leave. And then I did a crazy thing. I was camping in preparation. He learned to hobble. He learned to tie at night with just me in a tent there. So we practiced, in our local area. And I was camping one night and I heard a noise in the woods, and I was alone. First I was kind of proud of myself, but then I was kind of nervous. To cut to the chase, it just ended up being a deer. But it got in my head that night, I wished I had a dog with me. And that I'm the opposite of impulsive. I'm a planner. I'm a contemplator, as my husband says. But I searched and ended up adopting a puppy 6 weeks before we started out. And there's a whole story about Gypsy, a little mixed breed Collie Shepherd mix. But she came with us and she learned to ride. She eventually learned to get on the saddle by herself when she got a little bigger. But that was my only unplanned part before I left, as far as the animals go, was that I added a dog in all of a sudden.
I think that was probably a good idea.
Oh, you know what? Rainey's the hero of this story. Like, when I do a lot of book clubs and talks, but sometimes it's just horse people. And I love talking to them because when I tell about something that this horse did, like crossing a suspension bridge or having semi trucks go by you or staying in horse people are just like, I get it, and it's so nice to have someone else appreciate that horse. But that dog is as big a part of the story because she was our companion, and we became a family. We became a herd, whatever word you want to use. It was something special. And as horse people, I think we don't get this opportunity very often. I don't know if your horses are at home with you. That's a good thing. Some people board. I boarded for years. But I was suddenly in this situation where I was living with this horse 24/7. You know, I started to know, how often does he drink? How much does he drink? How often should he go to the bathroom? Does he lay down? How long do they lay down for? Like, it was kind of a neat thing where I just sort of put myself in this world where the horse and I were together. And even if they're home, they're in your backyard or you have your own barn, we don't get to do that very often. So it's very eye-opening. And I think it made me the horse person that I am. I don't know about riding. There will always be better riders and trainers and so on. I'm not that, but I am a very devoted horse person who like had this opportunity to live with my horse, you know.
Well, you know, when you think about it, when horses were much more part of our livelihood, if you will, you know, when they were horses that we used on the farm or used for transportation, you know, people spent so much more time with their horses. So that there's, you know, and you just, you know, it was part of our culture. It was part of our lives. And the more we get away from that, the less we actually, we're surprised by things that happen with our horse, or we don't know things about our horse because, you know, if you're boarding, you're there maybe a couple of hours a day, and there's a lot of time there with their horsey buddies or, you know, someone else is caring for them. And so it's, and it kind of, like you said, you know, about going west, when we went west, people were with their horses 24/7.
Yeah. Yep. That is absolutely. And they knew, I think all of us that are horse people, especially as they say of a certain age, we've all read Black Beauty, and it worked both ways though, that they were also a utility need for everyone, just like we all have a car or a truck. Yeah. And so there were people that treated them as that, but there were also, and I don't think any book describes both sides of that as well as Black Beauty, but there were people who knew we're a team, you're part of the family, we need you, you need me, and they treated them that way. So it can go both ways. But yeah, it was for the modern world, such as the 80s are modern compared to how many changes we've had since then. But it was a unique opportunity that was created, and it was very special. Like it colored that. The other day I said to my husband, if I get to be like 90, before that comes, do you think we could build like a walkway with railings to the running shed and we could keep hay? And I was like planning how to like still throw hay to horses if I was 90s. My husband goes, that's what you're worried about? I'm like, yeah, because they add so much to my life. And I'm sure you feel the same way. I just, you know what I mean? I can't imagine not having them. So yeah.
Well, but what you're saying, you know, like, movement is so important in our life, and having something that we need to go and care for and take care of and go feed and water and that sort of thing, it keeps us moving.
Yes.
And so many people, you see that when they slow down or stop moving, they age so much more rapidly. Right. Yeah. So there's the, and, you know, you think about, like, my family actually was in, like, I did some research for my mom because she wanted to be in the DAR, and her family goes back to the 1600s in Connecticut, and they lived into their 80s, and they lived a long time. You know, we think of that they like died early, but not my family. So they were moving, they were farmers.
Yeah, you know? It does make such a difference. And I do a nighttime hay once grazing season is kind of done. Like, I start around now, end of October, you know, I go out once before bed. And it just helps them work their way through the night, body heat, gut motility, all that. And every time I'm like, oh, it's so cold, and I'm going to put boots and all that. And then almost every time I'm out there, and it's obviously I live in a pretty rural area, and you get out there and the snow is sparkling and the sky is full of stars, and you get that friendly little whinny from one of the horses, and you're just like, thank goodness this is making me come out here and do this, you know, because what would I be doing? Watch TV or something, you know, I'm glad that's that instead, even though you have to kind of make yourself do it. I thank goodness that I have that, you know, gets you out there for sure. Yeah. So, yeah.
So when did you actually embark on this epic journey?
So I picked the date of May 1st. It happened to be a Saturday. It just seemed like perfect timing. Like, I figured I had an idea of how many miles we would do a day. I had sort of a plan for that, and remind me to come back to what happens to plans when you are living your life off the back of a horse. But I thought I had a plan, and it seemed like that would give me the majority of time over the easier seasons, spring, summer, fall, that I would probably be where I wanted to be by winter. And that part was true. As far as planning, the rest of it kind of went out the window. But and that's why I picked that date. And you know what it started to feel like? I had been talking about this. In fact, I had a friend. One of the nice things about having a book out in the world is I hear from people, people I went to school with. It's been very positive side of the internet, let's say. But I had somebody say, I remember you talking about that now they say middle school, but we used to say junior high. You didn't even have a horse yet. And I was like, someday I'm going to ride a horse. I was like, you remember that? Like, I did talk about that. So what happened is I got Rainey. Was 19, 20, 21, 22. And you suddenly get this feeling, am I going to be one of those people who talks about something and never does it? Because there was always like, well, not this year, I'm going to save a little more, or there was always something, Yep. And then one year I was 23, and that, like I always joke. So I had bought Rainey when he was 4. So he was 7-ish, and 7 or 8. I'm like, that's prime age for a horse. And 23 is a prime age for a human, So we just said, we're going to go. And I got serious about it and picked a date and made plans and set out. And it was the hardest thing I ever did, because I'll tell you why. It was a fantasy. Even though I was planning stuff for the horse, I had camping gear. I even got a sponsorship. It's called Eureka Camping. I don't know if, they're still in business. They're just not. They sponsored me and they didn't give me money, but they gave me a tent and a little camping stove and a lightweight stuff that a horse could carry, gear and so on. They just sewed extra logos on. So I was very serious with all that stuff. So I prepared. I myself was in good shape at the time. Also, you're 23, right? So you don't worry about that as much. But what happened was it was a fantasy. Like, I was kind of saying, I'm going to ride all day and I'll be free and I'll meet people and I'll be camping in the beautiful outdoors. And I think I even said these exact words in my book. It's very different when you are really, really walking away from your life. I had friends at the time. I had a boyfriend, have family here. And I just was like, everybody else my age is getting a job and settling down, and I'm going to do this, And all of a sudden I always said, I like to be alone. I'm a person that can handle and even needs a lot of alone time. But it's very different when it's all the time. And I said, I like meeting people. I'm a mixture of both, but you can't guarantee that you're going to see people. And I had just walked away from the life that I knew. And I think my mistake initially was that I did not emotionally prepare. I logistically and physically, I had gear. I conditioned the horse. I knew all this stuff about his health. And then all of a sudden I just sort of walked away from my life. So the first few weeks were very, very difficult emotionally and mentally. And what saved me was those 2 animals, because we all toss around the terms, this is my best friend. This is my best friend. But you're out there in the woods or on the side of a road. And remember, so there's no cell phones, there's no blogging, there's no posting. I did not have a team following me with a truck or a trail. It was me who walked away on my horse from everything I ever knew. And the dependency between me, Rainey, and my dog Gypsy, it was a gift. Like, that's what saved me, because you could either go, this is too lonely, this is too scary, or you could go, I have these guys. And it got to the point, and I think no matter what discipline we choose to do with our horses, it got to the point where I would almost just think something and these animals would know. And you can't put a price on that, and pretty soon that bond, I adjusted. It's like anything else. You go away to college for the first time, or you get married, or you bring home a new baby, any of those things, you wanted it, you planned it, you wished for it. But all of a sudden the reality's sometimes a little different.
You have no idea what it's actually like till you do it.
Yes. And that's how this was. Like I said, I pictured myself, I'm free, I'm riding all day, haha. And all of a sudden it's like, you're alone all day. It's raining, you're sunburnt, So it was an adjustment to be like a little wild woman. because I came from a pretty normal background. So, but the strength of those animals and their kinship with me kept me going. And eventually, not too long, a few weeks, that became my life. And I always joke about it. At the end, it was very hard to become a normal member of society. Yeah. So yeah.
No, it's true. It's true. It's absolutely true. And I think so many people don't take that opportunity to actually be with themselves and have that experience and then recognize what it's like to, I've had similar types of experiences. I didn't do what you did, obviously, but I know exactly what you're talking about. And when we have to get real with ourselves.
Yeah. And also it tests you. There's any number of words that are coming to my head: perseverance, your resourcefulness, your capabilities of like adapting and dealing with things. Like there are stories in the beginning, and in the beginning, I actually have a friend who is in the field of psychology and so on. And she said, your book was painful in the beginning because you could see how you felt so ripped away from, and nobody made me do it, but it would have been too embarrassing to quit. Like pride keeps you going too in the beginning. But she goes, I could feel the sense of how hard it was to adjust. Because as much as I say I like being alone, we choose that. Like we're like, oh, I need an hour for a cup of tea, or I'm going to take a walk with my dogs in the woods or trail ride. But it's different when you just go 100%, Yeah. And so she said, I could really feel the sense of how alone you felt. But it does test those things, your resourcefulness, like I said, your capability and your strength, because you can quit. I could quit. I wasn't doing this for any reason other than that I thought I wanted to. And when you keep going, the tide starts to turn the other way, and it just becomes very rewarding and is something we all have. I'm not a brave person. I'm not a thrill seeker, but when things come up, you learn I can deal with this. Like in the beginning of these stories, there are stories that, well, I should backtrack for a minute. A kind of a unique thing happened, and it is about horse people, rural people, people in general. Is the first few days I had a farrier that was very well known and kind of knew a lot of people. And he had helped say, the first night, ride to here. This is a nice barn and they'll have a stall ready for you. And the second night, there's someone else I shoe. Their kids are in 4-H. You'll be safe with them. So I had like a few nights where I wasn't supposed to be alone. But what happened, my timing was so bad. Like I had said earlier, my plans went out the window. I didn't make it to where I thought I would make it. I ended up day one, totally depending on the kindness of strangers. Like I said, plans out the window. And as horse people, we see this a lot. We can be a little bit competitive. We can think I wouldn't do it that way or something. But when horse people see a horse or a person like that in need, they respond. Like if you see a broken down horse trail on the side of the road, no horse person is going to drive by without stopping and helping them, or a loose horse or something, and that's what really shines through in this story. Was people would hear about us or see us and like, I don't want her to just be out there on her own. Let's go find her, and people would come and go, we brought you dinner. We brought hay for your horse. And it started what I call my chain of people, because I was only riding about 20 to 25 miles a day. That's a question I should probably get out of the way, because people ask me that a lot. Average, we had days that were longer and days that were shorter, but that's an average, 20 to 25. And, if you had to name a horse person 20 miles from your hometown, people, maybe where you get hay, or you showed, or the kids showed 4-H or something. So what would happen is people like, well, we feel funny just sending you out on the road. Let me call so-and-so. They have a nice farm. They'll watch for you and put you up. And so I had that chain. It was kind of amazing that the whole beginning part was people kind of passing us along. And it did change a little bit when I was far in the true West, not because people were less kind, but there were simply less people, Right.
The distances are so much greater. They're actually probably in a way even more sensitive to it because of that.
Exactly.
But the spaces, it just changed dramatically.
It changed. Like the first few the whole section of the beginning of the book is kind of these neat stories, and people are very involved. Even though I've said how lonely I was, people keep stepping in and out of this story. because it was the Northeast, then it was the Midwest, and there's all these friendly small towns, or the one diner where all the farmers go, and they would come and bring me hay, or say, come, I called my wife and told her you're coming for lunch, and that type of thing. There was always farms and little general stores and everything. Then all of a sudden, you know, sometimes people always, I think there's even a song like, where does the West begin? And for me, I know different regions, but to me, I always say Western Kansas, because all of a sudden it was just us and the wind and the road rolling out in front of us. And sometimes we would go days and not see a little town or a friendly diner or something. In a car, you would, but I'm going 20 miles.
Yeah, but Kansas, there's a lot of space in Kansas, a lot of flat space. Yeah.
Yes. And then we had Oklahoma and Texas Panhandle and New Mexico. And then it's a whole different story. But for the most part, people were involved that I didn't know and couldn't have planned, that really helped this dream and this journey be successful.
You know, I actually think that how do I put this? I mean, I get it with horse people, but you know, people in general really want to help. And somehow we forget that.
Thank you.
We forget their generosity and their willingness, and, you know, seeing somebody that needs something. And we sometimes forget.
Wendy, I could not agree more. And it makes me sad to hear people be so discouraged anymore. We are in some divisive times, but I do, like I said, I do a lot of book talks and that type of thing. And at the end, without fail, someone almost always goes, oh, but you could never do that now. And I always say, well, hold on. There are people doing that now. There's a great book that came out less than 2 years ago, The Last of the Pony Express, I think is Will Grant. He gets into the history of Westward movement, but he went on horseback to retrace the original Pony Express route. That's just one example because it's the most recent one that I've really enjoyed. But there are always equestrian adventurers. The biggest difference is technology, you know, but I have stories of, there's a woman in this area who did not the same thing, but a long distance ride in the 2000s. There's another young man who did it on a bike that I know. And again, with a guy, it's different. Women are much less threatening that people would invite me in their homes. They might not have done that if I was a 6 foot tall guy, you know, but I'm aware of that. But he also has similar stories.
I was going to say, no, he'll find people in his ilk that you know, guys or bikers or whatever, you know,
it's people in general. And that's not to say, in case there's any young girls out there watching, I'm always careful. You have to be smart. And I'm not saying that there isn't the chance that evil could cross our path, but there's a lot of ways that you can take your best odds. And if we lose our faith in people in general, we're all in trouble. And that's what I think does come across in this story. And, you know, it's kind of funny because I'd worked on this book for many years, obviously, because it just came out a few years ago and this was in the 80s. But after all that, it ended up coming out during the pandemic. And at first I was like, oh, no book launch, no parties, you know, no. But it kind of had a funny side that it helped because, first of all, people were home reading more. I was able to do a lot of Zoom talks in other states and other places. But what was really nice, that was a very contentious time period, 2020, for many reasons, as you may recall. And one of the most rewarding things was people, because there are so many stories of people helping out, reaching out to us. And people said, I forgot who we are. We really are a country of neighbors. And a journey like this shows that. And I said, and it's not, nothing has changed. We don't have to know who you voted for or anything to see someone in need and help them. You know what I mean?
And you know, I couldn't agree more. Based on my own experiences, you know, I lived in Australia for a year I lived with, but I would have people like, I'd meet them and they go, hey, I got a basement. You want to live in my basement? And you know, I mean, and so I think it's, you know, like I found the Australians warmer. I think climate makes a difference. When it's a colder area, you're a little bit colder because I don't know, but I've had similar experiences. And like when I started webinars with Wendy, I started during COVID, and the number of people that still come up to me and say, you know, thank you so much. It helped me through COVID because it was a community, right?
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
Right. And so I agree with you so much that it's so easy to think of us and them, others, and not realize we're all the same, right? We all have the same nervous system. We all have the same, skeleton with muscles, and we move around on this earth. And there's so much more that unifies us that's similar. And given an opportunity, people want to help people.
I think that is so true. Speaking of, I don't know if anyone listening knows, but in the beginning we talked that we had met briefly just this past weekend at the Horse Expo Equine Affair. And I have to tell you, my car wouldn't start when I got back out to that big field and I was going home. And this is a perfect way to say this. 2 women came and helped me. So a shout out to Rachel and Melanie there. And we couldn't get it started. It wouldn't start. And talk about what this whole story is about. One of them's like, well, I can do this and drive you here. Total strangers, don't know their last names, nothing. This just happened like 48 hours ago. And the other one goes, I have a hotel room. There's room. Like, I'm a total stranger. And I'm like, of course, we finally got the car going. I said, I don't carry a lot of cash. So, and they're like, no. I said, wait, I have a book I can sign to you. So I gave both of them, I go, that's what this is about. And it was just such a funny thing to have that happen. And now we're talking about that. So I did have that experience again recently. And I do know, and again, not trying to see everything through rose-colored glasses. Sure, it could have been different people that came along. Things can be different and bad things do happen, or less pleasant things. But I don't know if I have that faith in people in general, and I still do. And I don't think anything will ever take that away. It's nice to hear you say the same.
Well, and it doesn't mean that. So, the thing about you being alone is you had to get much more in tune with your senses, and you had to be able to read the situations and decide, is this safe or not safe? And we all have that ability. That was one of my talks that I gave. It's like we all have that ability to recognize what it's like to feel safe. And that's what we're looking for. And you can read that in a situation if you just practice it a little bit consciously.
Exactly. And hanging out with animals, and you may have found this when you did that topic, it increases that in us because that's how they live. And the more time you spend with them, we do the same. Like, sometimes people go, how did you not get lost? Because remember, there's no GPS. Or I had paper maps. I remember standing on the side of a road and having these big unfoldable maps against poor Rainey's side, like reading them on the saddle, and I was like, it's hard to explain, but you almost like you just know, it's kind of like if you're really tied, got a strong connection with the horse, where if something's off, and you watch him moving, like he's not really lame, but it's something. Like, we get tuned into that the more we hang out with them. And I have a whole story in that book about that. In fact, it's a new story in the audio version I think it's called Hidden Campsite. And I was saying, those companion animals with me, and I have to add one more. You'll find it in the story if you haven't read the book, but we ended up halfway through the journey adding a mule. So in the end, it was a mule with us too. But those animals, horses, dogs especially, who they're descended from, what's in their DNA, they survive as individuals and as species by their instincts, by knowing what will keep them safe and well. And I was living with them, and I became the same way, I think. Like, camping at night, I'd be like, I don't like this spot. And you can't say why. There's nothing specific, but we'll keep moving. You know what I mean? And there's a story in that about saying, like, staying up at night around a campfire, being able to sleep, but also that part of you is tuned in for the sound of danger in the night, because that's how they lived, and that's how I'm living with them, And
and again, we all have that capacity. It is part of our nervous system. It's part of our, it's in our brain. It makes me think of the Aborigine in Australia. They can walk a path that's 5 years old. Right. And the American Indians, the same thing, because they're in tune with themselves in nature. Yeah. We've kind of gotten a little just because we're disconnected doesn't mean we can't connect.
Yeah. You can always, connection is something that can always be worked on. It can be new. It can be bettered. I fully agree with that. I fully agree. Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Well,
so where did you, just out of curiosity, where did you end up at the end of your journey?
So I will give you a quick rundown. So we left on May 1st from New York. We crossed through parts of 14 states. And if you can picture a map of the US, we went in kind of a southwesterly direction. And we went through the heart of the Midwest and Kansas and part of Oklahoma. And I will say the absolute hardest part was the Texas Panhandle. It was very rugged, very desolate. We ran into things that we didn't run into anywhere else there. And then into New Mexico, Arizona, part of Nevada. And where I stopped was in Southern California, not to the ocean, but in a little town called Needles, California, which is in the desert. And that's where we ended the journey. And there is several reasons why I picked that particular spot. Sometimes when I do my talks, people go, "Oh, why didn't you put your feet in the ocean? Why didn't you do this and that?" And I'm like, well, when you ride your horse 3,000 miles, you can pick where you stop. You know what I mean? But why didn't you do this? You know, I actually had someone go, "Why didn't you go up the West Coast into Oregon and everything?" I'm like, well, but I had several reasons, but the main one, and I don't want to spoil anything in the ending of the book because there are a few surprises, but the main one was, and this is something that horse people will understand, is that Rainey actually thrived in this lifestyle. So remember, he's walking every day. He's not jumping. He's not running around barrels. He's walking. And in the wild, that's what horses do, as we probably all know. They walk, I think they've tested that, up to 15 miles a day because they're grazers and foragers. And he was not overloaded with weight. He was mostly not on concrete, you know, he was in grass and everything. And he actually thrived on this lifestyle for a good long time. And I don't know if I should tell this because it is part of the story.
No, don't spoil the end.
Well, but there was a point in time, this deep communication, I feel like he told me when it was time. And so I said, we'll make it to California. But it was him communicating that he had done his job. You know, we'd done what we'd set out to do, and it was time. It was just time, you know. Yeah. There were several other reasons, so I won't spoil it. But
yeah, don't spoil it. But, you know, that's, you know, that's that same thing of being in tune with oneself. And I don't know if you've heard of, I recently listened to a book called Signs, and it's written by a woman who's an MD PhD. And and it's fantastic because she connects all the science behind our ability to recognize signs. And that's exactly what she calls it signs, but basically that intuitive part of us. And I recommend, you'll enjoy it like crazy.
I just wrote it down when you,
because it puts so much science behind looking at it from all different aspects. But again, it goes back to, and this is why, you know, why is The Wizard of Oz my favorite movie? Because Dorothy had the ruby slippers the whole time.
I have to tell you, that's in my top 5 favorite movies ever.
Yeah. She had the ruby slippers the whole time. She just didn't know how to use them.
Yes. It was her own power.
Right.
But you have to have your journeys, right? To learn.
Yes.
This was my Yellow Brick Road. Like someone said to me, this is how you became a grown-up. And I'm like, that, you know, that term coming of age story.
Yeah.
This was our journey. Yep. That's one of my all-time favorite. I have Wizard of Oz stuff in my house right now.
Oh yeah. Yeah. My friend, and I, she's called me, Dorothy forever. But it's, you know, and I think that's the same thing, is that we need to have our experiences that help us become adult. And in that process, we recognize we're capable, whether we're capable physically, mentally, emotionally, but we're capable. We can solve problems. We can work through things. We can recognize signs. We can learn to be in touch and intuitive with ourselves. Oh, who's that? That's okay. Mine's upstairs crying. And I was like, you know, I didn't let him come downstairs because I knew what would happen.
We have a 1-story house and we have a little renovation going on in one part. So they're free to wander here. So we didn't quite get through it, but yep.
It's okay. I love seeing kitties. And they're so intuitive. Oh my God. They're so crazy. That's like, what's his name?
This is Olive.
Olive. Great.
She's a funny one.
But that's, I mean, that's so cool.
I think that part of the first wave when this book came out, the first wave, it came from Trafalgar Square Books, which I'm sure you're familiar with. They are equine. Oh, she's going to play with my pen. Oh, you can take that. Yeah. The whole first wave of people that I was hearing from and talks I was doing was horse people. And it was very rewarding because, like I said, they could appreciate what I asked of this horse and how he willingly always did it. It wasn't just, he was not a machine. He was a character. He was funny. He had his own opinions. He was a very strong personality horse, but he was so willing. He was just amazing. So it was so rewarding to talk to horse people. But after a while, when the book was out, and it was one of the few, it was a little bit of a departure for that publisher because it is not strictly a horse book. Like they have a lot of how-tos and a lot of training manuals and Olympic authors and so on. And I'm a backyard horse owner that just sort of set this goal, and it had nothing to do with ribbons, or it was a different kind of achievement. And I started hearing from people that were not horse people, and they were like, I didn't know that they had such like personalities. And I was like, oh yeah, like he's part of, he's family, you know, like there's a time we camped a lot, and one time I must have taken longer than normal, and I felt the whole tent shaking, and he was out there, you know, with the shaking the tent a little bit like, hey, you know, isn't it time to eat? And I just looked out and see his perfect hooves and the little hooves of Amanda, the little mule, right beside him. And it's just, that's your family, you know what I mean? So, but it's nice hearing from non-horse people too, that were like, I didn't realize, like, it makes me want to ride. And it makes me, I actually had someone just recently tell me they never sat on a horse and that they are taking lessons now because that just intrigued them so much. So their personalities really come out. The mule is a character. She's funny. There's a lot of old wives' tales, I guess you'd say, about mules. Well, they're based a little bit on like most things like that, but also what a hard worker, what an amazing animal. And I'm happy to say they all lived very, very long, healthy lives with me forever. Obviously, it was over 40 years ago, so they are not still with me, but you might be surprised to know I just lost that little mule a few years ago. Not long ago. When I started talking to Trafalgar about the book right before that, I had lost her. So she was with me from young adulthood to my late 50s. So yeah, she was quite a character. So we have many stories. There's a touch of romance in there. There's danger, there's sadness, and there's a great deal of joy, because once I did make that adjustment that I referred to in the early weeks, it is a story of the open road and freedom. And like Rebecca from Trafalgar, we talked about it. It's a love story, like our country, our people, yourself, your animals, the people that you miss who aren't there with you, but they're rooting for you. It's a very uplifting story, you know, I think. So, all right.
So Melissa, where can people find your book?
It's everywhere that you can get books. It's, you know, Trafalgar has since been purchased by a different company, the Stable Book Group. It's available on their website, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Even it shows up on like Target.com and Walmart.com. The new audiobook, which this is kind of neat. And as a writer, it's a good compliment. Sometimes when I talk, I say writing a book was quite a learning process. And my first draft was way long. And I say I had to take out so many stories, you know, because in the beginning I say every road is a story. And when you put yourself out on a limb like that, it is. Every person that stops and tells you their story, every storm you make it through, every time you went the wrong way and you're lost on some dirt road somewhere, those are all stories. And I had to take many of them out to make it a viable book, you know. And I've had people ask, well, how do we write another one? I want to see these stories, you know. So we had the idea to add to the audiobook. So there's 10 new stories that are not in the original book. And that's what they are. They're life in general, but life on the road with your animals. And like I said, there's a lot of other people here and there. There's loneliness, but mostly I think it's just about being free and following a dream, not giving up on it. And it's changed my life all decades later, it's still, look at what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
It's introduced me to wonderful people that are still part of my life, and wouldn't change a thing. It's
awesome. Well, Melissa, thank you so much for joining me tonight. It sounds like it's an amazing read, and I can so relate to what you're talking about. So if there was one thing you would like someone to take away from this talk that we've had tonight, what would that be?
I guess it sounds like something you've heard before, but I would say follow your dreams, because it did change my life. And one thing I learned from this trip is I would talk to people that would reach out and help us. And they would always say, and I was very young to learn this lesson, but they'd say, you know what I always wanted to do? And it could be fill in the blank. It could be anything. And they're like, but I'm too old, but I got married, but it costs too much money. And I was like, there's no guarantees it was going to come true. There was no guarantees we were going to make it safely, but we tried. It happened to be successful, but at least try. It's worth it. And even if you get a piece of that, only if we only made it to Ohio or Indiana, I would have still had those days on the road in the sunshine with my animals. And whatever your dream is, it's nice if it's horses, but whatever it is, go after it in some small way. That's what I would say. It's changed my life in a positive, amazing way.
Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight. And let's see, I'm just seeing if, somebody said the audio book is as wonderful as the print.
Oh,
great. So somebody's already listened to your audio book.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to come say hi again next year at Equine Affair.
Okay, great.
Really enjoyed chatting with you. And thanks for your kind words and your interest in my story. I appreciate that.
Great. Well, have a great evening.
Thank you, Wendy. Good night.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.